Hello, everybody, and welcome to our masterclass or lunch and learn on intuitive eating with IBS. I'm seeing everybody pop in here. We are just waiting for our guest speaker, Dr. Alexis Conason, to join us. I think she's running a little bit late today. That's okay. We can do a little bit of housekeeping while we are waiting. If you are, hi, everybody. Wow. Okay. Everybody's dropping in here. This is so exciting. I'm so excited to have everybody here. If you could head over to your chat icon, it usually looks like a little text bubble. And if you could switch that from panelists and hosts to everybody, that way, if you have a question or if something isn't clear or you have something that you want us to circle back to at the end, we can collect all of those things, but also everyone can see it. If you want to say hi, if you want to tell us where you're from, you are more than welcome to do that. And then everybody can see what you are contributing to the conversation. I can see, everyone can see. Oh, here's Dr. Conason. Hello, welcome. So we are just getting started here. I am so excited to have you with us today. I see everybody is dropping in. We are about to have a great time. I was just introducing everybody kind of to the concept of what we're talking about today, which is obviously intuitive eating, sort of following your body's lead when it comes to being full and happy in your life. So I would like to be the first person to welcome you, Dr. Conason, to our conversation. How are you doing today?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing well. I'm excited to chat.
Perfect. So in case you guys haven't met Dr. Conason, well, in case you haven't met me before, hi, I'm Amy. I'm an IBS health coach and nutritionist. And I'm here with Dr. Conason today, who is a certified specialist for eating disorder health and also is the author of the Anti-Diet Plan. So we have a ton of questions that we've collected from our community today. I'm so excited to have you here, get your expertise on how to feel kind of full and happy and healthy when we're taking into consideration things like IBS, which do sometimes put a few restrictions or kind of necessities on the way that we approach kind of food and diet and overall health. So is it okay with you if we kind of jump in?
Yes, let's go.
Awesome. So my first question, of course, is what is intuitive eating kind of like in a nutshell?
So intuitive eating, I think of as the program that was outlined by two dietitians, Evelyn Tribole and Elise Resch, in their book, Intuitive Eating. So if people are interested in intuitive eating, I definitely recommend that book. That's kind of the go-to source on it. It's based around 10 principles of intuitive eating and really founded on an anti-diet framework, which is kind of rejecting the idea of rejecting diet culture, rejecting the idea that we need these outside rules, experts, regulations to tell us how to eat and what to eat, how to take care of our body. And it's a framework that's really designed to help people reconnect with themselves and learn to care for themselves without the push and pull that diet culture can bring.
Yeah, I love that. We're a community of people who kind of have a lot of health medical drama, if you will. And I always like to remind sort of my community that you are the expert on your body, right? Only you know what is right and what is not right for you. Everyone else is coming in as an expert with tools, but you are kind of a subject expert on your body. And so I kind of love that integration of like, I'm rejecting things that are sort of being put on me just because, and sort of turning that around and saying like, what do I actually need? Like I'm the only person who can hear kind of what is happening in my body, what does my body need, and how do I kind of address that? And so I kind of love that principle, like just as an overall kind of umbrella for how we approach kind of fueling and nurturing our bodies. I think that's awesome. So one question that I hear a lot, and our community uses the term intuitive eating, and I feel like we use it for a lot of things that maybe aren't intuitive eating. So can you kind of describe what is the difference between kind of the pulp culture term intuitive eating and what intuitive eating really is, kind of so we know the difference?
Sure. And I would love to hear if you have any examples of like, what are the kinds of things that you feel that intuitive eating gets attached to that maybe, isn't the true essence? Because I'm in a little bit of a bubble
Yes,
sometimes
me
with the
too.
intuitive eating world.
So when I hear people talk about intuitive eating, I think what people are actually trying to describe is mindful eating, which is, like I'm gonna like really listen to my body. I'm gonna chew really slowly so I can hear that signal, I'm getting kind of full or this isn't feeling good anymore. I feel like people are using intuitive eating kind of they kind of use it to describe the process of eating, which I could be totally wrong. That might be intuitive eating, like right on the head. But I hear people describing kind of the process of being aware of what is happening in their body, or trying to develop that muscle of awareness, as to like, when do I eat? How does it feel when I'm eating? How do I know to stop eating? Things like that.
Mhm. Yeah, so I think that there can be a lot of overlap between intuitive eating and mindful eating. And maybe it's helpful just to start with kind of like what those two terms are and the differences between them. And it's interesting how you describe kind of intuitive eating being applied to some things that maybe are more about mindful eating. I also hear, intuitive eating being kind of co-opted a bit by diet culture and used to refer to things that are pretty restrictive, like there was a book that came out, Intuitive Fasting, which is
Oof.
definitely not what intuitive eating is about. It's kind of like the opposite. But in terms of the difference between intuitive eating and mindful eating, and I'm going to preface this by saying that mindful eating also is a term that I think has gotten very co-opted by the diet culture. I think as companies have gotten savvy to the people just gotten being burned out on dieting, people like picking up that dieting doesn't work, that this is not how they want to spend their lives. The weight loss companies, the diet companies have been like, oh, we have a PR problem. And they've tried to kind of grab some of the things that people have been attracted to, like mindful eating and intuitive eating, which are ironically ways to heal from diet culture. So it's
Mm.
that I think is very frustrating. But it can also lead to a lot of misunderstandings of like what mindful eating really is. So mindful eating is about applying mindfulness practices. So mindfulness is taken from meditation traditions, and really that focus on being fully aware and present right here, right now, in this current moment. So mindful eating takes those meditative practices and applies them to our relationship with food. So it's about, and when I say our relationship with food, it's about, yes, things like being present when we're eating, but also being present with our body. So I think this is particularly relevant for people who do struggle with any kind of GI issues or chronic medical problems. Your body's sending you a lot of signals. And part of mindful eating is starting to learn to listen to the wisdom, the information that your body's sending you, and using that to guide your eating, rather than kind of these more, intellectualized or like, up here
Mhm.
rules about like what we should eat and what we shouldn't eat. It's about kind of moving that from what we think we know to what our body deeply knows, and really starting to listen to our body. So mindful eating can be things like being fully present with our food, taking the time to like look at what you're, to look at your food, to smell it, to taste it, to really immerse yourself in that experience of eating, instead of so often we eat and we're just kind of on the go and we're not really even registering that we're eating. So that's part of mindful eating, but also honoring the cues that your body's sending you. So starting to recognize, when you're hungry, and honoring that by eating and feeding yourself in those moments, and starting to get a sense of like where you feel satisfied or where you feel full, and what kinds of foods you enjoy eating, and what kinds of foods your body enjoys you eating. Because I think it is a balance between, the pleasure of food, and that is intertwined with how foods make our bodies feel, especially again for people who have medical issues that are, connected with what we're eating.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that that is absolutely lovely. What you're describing when you're talking about like being aware and present in your body, while you're eating, is kind of attached to one of my favorite tools. We call it Bless This Mess. And the idea is, when you're in a situation where, if you are on the low FODMAP diet, for example, and you're avoiding things like onion or garlic, and you're kind of out, you're at a party, you're with your, friends or whatever at a restaurant, and something goes in front of you and you're like, oh, like my gut is saying that there might be garlic in this, but I don't know. And so we use sort of the Bless This Mess technique to really dive into the moment and be like, you know what, I'm gonna get, like, if I'm choosing to eat it and not ask for it to be replaced, if I'm going to get symptoms, I'm going to get symptoms whether I worry about it or not. And so I'm going to really commit to being in this moment and like really just dive in and enjoy it and be present. And nothing is happening right now and my body's not responding right now. And so I'm really just going to like sink into this enjoyment. And often we find that that gives more room for kind of oopsies when it comes to FODMAP specifically, just because the body is so calm and it is so engaged in the moment that it can release a little bit of that tension. And so I love the way that you're describing it, of like the flavors and the textures and like really just be in your body, like you're doing a delightful thing. I mean, hopefully, depending on who's cooking for you, obviously, hopefully you're doing a delightful thing and don't miss it, if that makes sense. So I really, really like that. So you touched on this a little bit, how there's like overlap about mindful eating and intuitive eating. Are they or are they not kind of the same thing? Are there distinct features that kind of separate one from the other?
Yeah, so I think I don't see them as the same thing, but there is a lot of overlap. So, mindful eating, intuitive eating is referring to this very specific framework that can be traced back to this book that you can read and understand, like exactly, this is what mindful eating is. Here's the 10 principles. Here is how the authors who developed this philosophy define the 10 principles. It's like a very specific thing. Whereas when it comes to mindful eating, it can be much more vague and ambiguous because mindful eating isn't traced back to like any one person. There's no one book that is seen as the kind of authority on mindful eating. These are mindfulness-based traditions that are evolved from Eastern religious practices that have been, around for, thousands, I don't know how many years, eons. And no one claims them. They're just, things that have been brought into Western medical settings because these practices have been seen, found in research to be effective. But because there's no one like person associated with mindful eating or a book or anything like that, people are able to adapt it. And, there's so many different like definitions and versions of what mindful eating can be and what it looks like. Like, for example, weight loss programs like Weight Watchers say they do mindful eating. The mindful eating that Weight Watchers does is very different from the mindful eating that I teach in my practice. So I think a lot of places with mindful eating, and it can be confusing, will kind of water it down in a way to say, well, mindful eating is just about slowing down when you eat or turning off the television and not having distractions when you eat. And I think that's, just taking like a tiny sliver of what mindful eating is, because mindful eating is really the holistic practice of being present both with your food and with your body, with a sense of non-judgmental awareness and acceptance, and trying to approach yourself with more compassion, starting to be curious about your experiences instead of judging them. It's a whole, stance that we take with ourselves and with our bodies and with the world around us. I mean, one of my favorite things about mindfulness and mindful eating, oftentimes we see mindfulness is like being used in psychology, at least, to treat so many different things: depression, anxiety, parenting issues. It's being used with executives on increasing productivity. There's so many different things. And one of the reasons that mindfulness, I think, is applied to such a broad spectrum of issues is that it's not specifically addressing symptoms. It's really changing the way that you relate to yourself and the world around you. And that changes everything in your life. So, mindfulness can be broad, but foundational to mindfulness and mindful eating is a sense of acceptance and compassion. And to me, that is inconsistent with cutting calories and, dieting, because we want to really honor what our body is telling us. And if we are in diet mentality or, coming from a framework that we shouldn't be eating X, Y, or Z, it can be really hard when our body is saying, this looks really good, or I want to eat this. And then we, might feel shame about wanting those foods or shame for eating them. And that's so inconsistent with what mindful eating is all about. So I really love what you shared before about the bless this mess strategy, because I agree. I think that's really consistent with mindfulness and mindful eating. And in my program, I talk a lot about how the choices we make around food should be choices and not rules or restrictions. So I think that we always have the power to kind of balance that, like the things that we're craving or things that look good with us, with also the wisdom of like how our body has reacted to different foods in the past, and make that choice. And I think that making that choice shifts us out of that, why did I do that? I can't believe I ate that, kind of that beating ourselves up, and brings us into a more of a place of acceptance and compassion, right? Like if you're faced with something in front of you that, like you said, has garlic or something that may upset your stomach, we have a choice, and there's really no right or wrong. It's just about understanding this looks really good. I'm probably going to be spending some time in the bathroom afterwards if I eat it. Like, am I okay with that? And I think that decision might change. Like if you're out at a fancy party, maybe you don't want to have it. If you're going to be sitting in your living room, maybe you're more okay.
Yeah, no, you're describing exactly what I teach all of my clients. We call it buying on credit. So part of doing sort of the oral re-challenge, which is the gold standard for looking for food sensitivities, is, would I eat it at a party? Exactly. Would I eat it at home in my pajamas watching Netflix? Because we want as much diet diversity as possible. We don't want to be taking out things that you want to be eating. But also by testing all of the foods, A, exactly what's going to happen when you eat it, and B, how long you have before that hits. And so we call it buying on credit. Like, is it worth it when you're paying for it later? And if it is, awesome, that was a great buy. And if it wasn't, you might be inclined to choose not to do that later. But the goal is to kind of get people off of the lists and the handouts and the cheat sheets and just start relying on their body to be like, yeah, I'm not buying that on credit. That is too expensive for me. Not doing it.
Yeah. And I think that's actually really empowering for folks to be able to know that they can make choices, and that it's not about someone else telling you what to do, but about, owning like I keep saying, the wisdom of your own body, because I really do think our bodies, have that knowledge, and, trusting yourself, which is
Yeah.
hard.
And I think it's really important to point out that FODMAPs don't hurt your body in any way. So this is not the same as, say, having like celiac disease or having an allergy, where obviously we don't want to be introducing those things into your body, no matter how much you're craving pizza. Food sensitivities, on the other hand, because they are very unpleasant but don't do any damage, like those we would buy on credit. If that makes sense, just so people aren't going like, oh, like I'm just gonna go eat my whatever then.
Yeah, although I do think that people who have, it's interesting in my experience, and this isn't, my specialty area, but when I have worked with people with celiac disease or something like that, it's very rare that I hear people even craving those foods, because I think that our body really does like hold on to that knowledge that, oh my gosh, this food is going to make me so sick. And we all know, if we've had experience adverse reactions to different foods, there's like, I hear stories about people who had a, time where they got sick from a food 25 years ago and they still don't want to eat it. So those reactions in our body can be very powerful.
Yeah, I don't know how much I believe in the whole like the body keeps the score thing. I think that might have been put a little bit out of proportion, but I definitely think your body remembers. It does. That
It
your
does.
body remembers for sure.
Yeah, I actually did some really interesting research when I was writing my book into the kind of evolutionary piece of that. And it plays a huge role that, when our ancestors, if we ate a berry that made us sick or something when we are, hunter and gatherers, that's really like survival information to know that we should never eat that again,
Those were bad
and
mushrooms.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So our brain still, thinks in that way.
Perfect. So another question that we got is, can you jump right into something like mindful eating or intuitive eating, or is there work or steps that need to be done first in order to sort of make you successful on that journey?
So different people have different thoughts on this. I personally think that anyone can practice mindful eating. Mindful eating is at the very basic level, just about being aware and present with your food and with your body. So I don't think that we have to do any prep work. Now, I will say a lot of people, you know, um, like read some Instagram posts about mindful eating or intuitive eating, or maybe a book or something, and feel like, okay, I'm going to, start doing this. And the truth is, and I don't want to just, reading a book, maybe you will get more information, but um, mindful eating and intuitive eating are more than just, eat whatever you want and don't diet. There are specific structures and tools that professionals use to help people get there, to learn to, especially when we've been disconnected from our body for so many years. Like, it can be hard to reestablish that connection. So one thing I do see a lot of is people say, oh, I tried intuitive eating, it didn't work for me, or I tried mindful eating, it didn't work for me. And I'm like, oh, what did you try? And they said, well, I just tried to be more present with my eating, or I didn't watch TV while I was eating, or I, chewed my food 40 times, or whatever these kinds of like tidbits are that you get from a magazine article or an Instagram post. And it's missing so much. So, if you are interested in mindful eating or intuitive eating, I would recommend checking out a book, a program, having some structure and guidance to it. Because I think when we just try to say, oh, I'm just going to listen to my body, like, what does that mean and how do we do that? So I think that can be very confusing. But, I believe that everyone can work from a mindful eating and intuitive perspective if that resonates for them. And it doesn't mean that you don't need additional support or guidance from a registered dietitian or a therapist. And sometimes mindful eating isn't just about listening to your hunger and fullness, but if those signals are disrupted, for example, in like early stage recovery from anorexia or some other eating disorders, sometimes it is important to make sure that you're working with a dietitian to, be eating regularly and making sure you're getting enough to eat while you're transitioning to listening to your body.
I know another thing that I've heard expressed in my community is that people are worried if they kind of just give their body permission to want what it wants, that they're going to do nothing but like eat like chips and candy and chocolate and all those things. And I've heard you mention that before on sort of your social media stream, and like, yeah, like that, like, okay, it happened. Like it's going to get really boring really fast. And I know that on my personal sort of mindful eating journey, I did go through that phase and it got really boring really fast. And now my husband teases me all the time when we go on vacation. We like to go to Jamaica, and we go there and there are just plates of desserts everywhere all the time. And all I eat is fruit. All my body wants is fruit because they're like picking it from the trees at the resort. And I've never in my life had fruit like that. And it's just so much fruit all the time that he used to remind me that I actually have to eat things with like protein in them. He's like, you're not going to feel good in a couple of days. You need to start adding things into this. You cannot just eat fruit for 7 days. Like that will not end well. So it's something interesting that I hear pop up a lot. Do you have any advice that you kind of want to put out on the record for people who are concerned about that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's also one of the most common hesitations I hear to an anti-diet approach is exactly what you're saying. If I'm not controlling what I'm eating, if I'm just listening to my body, I'm just going to eat X, Y, and Z, all day, every day. And in all honesty, in all my years working with clients, and I've been doing this for over 12 years, and leading groups with, I've worked with quite a few people, I've never really seen that fear materialize. I've never seen that happen. I think that what tends to happen is that, like you said, it's a pendulum. So, we've been over here for a long time, restricting what we're eating, feeling like, take ice cream, for example. If we say ice cream is off limits, and the fear is that I never allow myself to eat ice cream. I can't even bring it into the house because if I have ice cream, I won't be able to control myself. I won't be able to stop eating it. So I'll eat all day, every day. So I don't allow myself to eat it. And then we start to say, so that's where kind of the baseline. And then you start to say, okay, I'm going to allow myself to have ice cream. There is a period of time where we're going to, we might say, oh my gosh, I can have ice cream and this is delicious and this is so good. And we have more of it than maybe our body is calling for. I think one of the biggest places that people go off track that I see in my work is that people then say, oh my gosh, what were you talking about? I was right. I just had a whole pint of ice cream and now I don't feel good. And why did you tell me to trust my body? My body can't be trusted. And then they say, I'm going back to here, right? I'm going back to no more ice cream. I'm not keeping this in the house. I'm throwing that other pint in the, in the garbage or whatever. And that reinforces that cycle where we feel, that food has control over us. We can't eat it. But if you stay on the path and continue to allow yourself to have the ice cream, so after maybe that time where you have more of it than you feel comfortable having, and then you start to say, oh, okay, that experience happened, it didn't feel great, the ice cream was really good, I'm going to keep buying ice cream and keep it in my house. And whenever I want ice cream, I'm going to have it. And you keep doing that over time, your body and mind acclimates to the idea, starts to trust that you can have this food whenever you want it. And that's when things start to stabilize. So I think that there is kind of this, pendulum feeling in the beginning that can feel really scary for folks and can feel like you're out of control around food. But if you stay the course with compassion and kind of just allow yourself to start to feel secure that this food is always available, then things do stabilize and you start to be able to recognize, I really can have ice cream whenever I want it. When do I actually want it? Mm-hmm. And kind of like what you shared around your trip to Jamaica and the desserts, I think that when there's like an abundance, we start to be able to discern, what do we really want? I can always have this. I can have anything. What is it that I'm truly craving in this moment? And sometimes that answer really surprises people.
Sometimes it's papaya.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. So we've talked a little bit about diet culture. How do you sort of in your professional sense, especially as a certified eating disorder counselor, how do you see something like diet culture impacting a community like people with IBS, where we're kind of just fed constantly, like it's what you're eating, it's what you're eating, it's what you're eating, which is not true for most people. It's often a balance of many things. How do you see diet culture in particular kind of seeping into our group? And how that might, how using sort of mindful eating or intuitive eating might help us actually have more success with what we're trying to do?
Yeah, so I think that diet culture influences everything around us because it's just kind of in the air, so to speak. But I think that, in particular, diet culture and wellness culture really emphasizes this personal responsibility narrative around health. So this idea that, if you have IBS, it must be caused by something that you're eating. For folks with diabetes, that's your fault. You didn't, restrict your sugar intake or whatever. And those narratives are really misleading. We know that, such a huge, like the things that, if you look at the pie chart of what makes up our health, like what we're eating and how we're moving, and those kind of lifestyle factors are such a tiny sliver of the pie. And things like genetics, and socioeconomic status, chronic discrimination, like those things have a much bigger impact. But for some reason, we just look at this tiny little sliver and then say, like, it's your fault that you have this. And similarly, I think that there can be a lot of self-blame with people with IBS, for example, that if you did make the choice to, eat something that upsets your stomach, or if you just have, a IBS attack and you're not sure what it is, it's like, I think that there can be a real sense of self-blame and shame and guilt that comes along with that, which of course can, only worsens GI symptoms because stress plays a big role in that as well.
Yeah.
So I think that, diet culture really does have its fingers in that idea of like personal responsibility, and that we, somehow also kind of the moral attachment to like, if we, that what we eat has any impact on like who we are as human beings.
Yeah.
And in terms of mindfulness and intuitive eating, I think that can be really helpful in terms of just starting to regain trust in yourself and recognize that, first of all, who we are is about so much more than, what we eat or what we look like. And also that we have the power to care for ourselves, that we can make our own choices. And we don't have to just be beholden to this, often one size fits all advice around what we should and shouldn't eat. Like I often tell clients, yes, this doctor is giving you this, 3-page list of like things shouldn't eat for this medical condition, but they don't know, your unique body. Maybe some of those foods are things that will aggravate your medical condition, but maybe some of those things are things that you're fine with. A doc, that's not fine-tuned advice specifically for you. It's
Mhm.
just general things that I think doctors and experts tend to feel is low risk. Let's eliminate everything that could possibly have an impact. And
We'll start with the
you
top
know
8 allergens.
right,
Turn
exactly.
everything.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm like, have these doctors actually like met a human before? Because
Mm.
there's an impact of telling people that they, have to follow this very restrictive diet, but for some reason, I think a lot of doctors and experts kind of see that as like a low risk
Yeah.
intervention.
Yeah. So I like something that you mentioned before about kind of putting that responsibility on people, like saying, hey, like you have control over, all of these things. If you're getting symptoms, it's because you're not doing X, Y, and Z. And I think the inverse of that is also important to talk about, where it gives you a false sense of control, right? It gives you a false sense of power where you think, oh, I can manage this through food. And if I just do this perfectly, like, and if it's not working, then I just have to add more stuff, and then I just have to add more stuff, because when I find the perfect amount of things that I've cut out, I'm going to feel better. And then you feel better for 2 minutes, and then because you're missing sort of all of the nutrients and all of the fiber and all of those lovely things, you end up with different problems. And we're not talking about how pulling out all of those foods over a long time is actually causing sort of a separate issue. And so people are still addressing this issue as IBS. They're getting this, chronic bloating. Every time you put any morsel of anything in your body, it just blows up. We're talking about people who are getting tons of acid reflux and things like that because they're just not eating during the day. And we're treating that still like IBS. And so they're throwing IBS tools at these things when really we've sort of, I don't want to say created, because again, that puts on responsibility when people are just doing what they're told. They're being good patients, right? They're being good clients. And they're thinking that they're, using their power to help themselves feel better. And they've created a second issue, and no one's even telling them this is something else. And oops, my bad, I did that. Like, let me help you fix what I broke. And so again, there's that sense of responsibility of, I must not be doing this right, or I must not be trying hard enough, or I must not be cutting out enough things because it's still not fixed. And they told me this was going to be the solution. And so I think looking at it kind of from both directions, if we can sort of talk to this with our clients and in our communities about, sort of releasing them from that responsibility and from that power, that will, I don't want people to feel like hopeless or like there's nothing you can do, but it definitely opens up doors for different approaches and different tools to solving problems, and also identifying which problems you're actually having and how they kind of came to be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I really agree with that. And I think that this is something we see really commonly, not just with people with GI issues, but also I think the way that our culture kind of thinks about health in general with this personal responsibility narrative. It's like, if I can just do X, Y, and Z and like do this well enough, then everything will be okay. And I think this can be definitely like a slippery slope into eating disorders as well. There's a lot of overlap between people who get diagnosed with a medical condition like IBS or, diabetes or anything like this, any medical condition where there's an association of, where doctors are often recommending like some kind of restrictive diet. It can really set people up for eating disorder because, we start to feel, well, if I just cut this out more, if I just cut out, this and that, and people can end up on very restrictive diets that are, disordered or not sustainable, and can lead to binge eating and restrictive eating and just really kind of nasty cycles around food. So that's, yes. And I think a lot of it is about control, because it's really scary when we have a medical diagnosis and our body isn't working the way that we want it to. And, we're in pain and discomfort. And of course, we want to try to resolve this. And if doctors are telling us the way to resolve it is through, cutting out these different foods in our diet, we want to try to do that. And then when that doesn't work, I just can kind of become a cycle of more and more and more.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so I did want to ask you about your book before we go. What inspired you to write the anti-diet plan?
Yeah, so the anti-diet plan actually is my Instagram account, and then my book is The Diet-Free Revolution, but super easy to get those confused. So I have been wanting to write this book for a long time. It was really inspired by my work with clients, and especially when I was first starting out teaching mindful eating. Again, this was like over 10 years ago. There were so few resources available that talked about mindful eating from a non-diet approach. So I was wanting to, write something for people, both for, my clients who were wanting to say, I want to share with my friend or my parent or my sibling, like what I'm doing so that they get it. Do you have any books that you would recommend? And honestly, I was like stumped because every book, was so diet focused. So I didn't
Yeah.
want to recommend those. But then also it's really, therapy can be very inaccessible. It's very expensive, and not that my book would ever be a replacement for therapy, but I wanted to just kind of share these tools that I saw in my practice, people making really transformative changes with. You shouldn't have to like pay for therapy to be able to get access to those tools. So I just wanted to give those to a bigger slice of people.
Well, we definitely appreciate it because yes, therapy is expensive. It can be hard to access depending on where you are. I know there are licensing issues. So like people who are specializing in this can't necessarily work with everyone. And so until we have sort of more people available, like sort of everything we can get is super, super helpful. So thank you for creating that. If my peeps kind of want to follow you, they want to work with you, where can they find you?
So they can find me. I'm most active on social media on Instagram at the Anti-Diet Plan. And you can find information about I have an online course that teaches mindful eating from a anti-diet, weight inclusive perspective, called the Anti-Diet Plan, and all the information about that. And if anyone is interested in just kind of dipping their toes into mindful eating and getting a little bit more introductory information, I have a bunch of free resources on there, including a longer video that really dives deep into the difference between intuitive eating and mindful eating. And that's all available on that website, theantidietplan.com. And then if you're interested in finding out more about me and my work, that's at drconason.com, including there's a link to buy the book through there and some anti-diet merch if you're interested in that kind of thing. And then if you're in the New York area and interested in therapy, our website is ConasonPsychologicalServices.com.
Perfect. So one last question for you before I let you go. If my people are kind of interested in expanding kind of the people that they're following or the information that they're consuming, in addition to your information, how will they know if the person that they're following is kind of like a good place to be versus like, I know everybody kind of throws around the word charlatan a lot. How do they know that they're in a safe place where they're going to be getting reliable information?
So, I would say one big red flag to look out for is accounts that are teaching anti-diet, intuitive eating, mindful eating, and weight loss, and promising weight loss. So I know that it's really hard to parse that out, and a lot of people do want to lose weight, and it's hard to balance, that desire with, like, I think that people want to kind of sell you it all,
Mhm.
so they know what people want and they want to just promise it, but really, like, intuitive eating is inherently a weight inclusive perspective, so is mindful eating. So it's really about working, if you are interested in improving, it doesn't mean that we don't care about health. If we're interested in improving health, like, we can do that without focusing on weight. There's a lot of research to support that. And we see that people are able to make longer term changes that are more compassionate and caring for themselves versus, chasing this like weight loss goal. So that's definitely one major red flag that I would look out for in terms of, accounts that are promoting both intuitive eating or mindful eating and weight loss or weight management. That's the biggest thing. I would say look out for credentials, but I also feel that there's a lot of great folks out there doing this work who don't have a whole bunch of letters behind their names. And I learned so much from those people. And, I don't think that just because you have access to education, that means that you're somehow more qualified to speak on some of this stuff. I think people with lived experience have a lot to a lot of really wise things to offer us, and I hope professionals spend more time listening to some of those folks as well. So I don't really think it's so much about the degrees or the profession, the professional credentials, but um, and trust your gut. I think if you're following someone who's being more prescriptive in terms of, eat this, not that, and making you feel bad about what you're eating in any way, then definitely something just to pass over on.
Yeah. I always say if anybody's making you feel bad or like like you're not enough or you're not trying hard enough on Instagram, just get rid of them. They're not
Yeah,
helping.
exactly. Yeah, it's so easy. It's so much easier on social media than in our real lives, but just
Yeah.
that unfollow button can be really powerful.
I totally wish there was an unfollow button in real life. That'd be so much
Totally.
easier.
Totally.
Perfect. All right. So that is the end of the questions that we sort of collected for you. Thank you
Yeah.
so, so much for coming to talk to us. It was a wonderful conversation, so enlightening. And I'm sure that as we kind of put it up and everybody has access to it, that the community will really appreciate sort of what you've been able to bring for us here today. So hope I speak for everybody where I say thank you so, so much for taking the time to come and talk with us. And I think that's it.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And I want to add, I see that someone did type a question in. If people have questions, I'm happy to, if you DM me, I'm happy to answer it via Instagram, or you can email me. My email's info@Dr. Conason. So both for the person who answered this question that I think we don't have time to get to here, or for people who are watching the recording, have anything else that came up that they want to chat about, I'm happy to answer questions.
Excellent. You can always forward the questions to me as well, and I'm happy to send them Dr. Conason's way. All right, perfect. Again, thank you so, so much for coming and sharing your knowledge with us. And I hope everybody has a really great day. Bye.
Thanks. Take care.